The sound of heavy machinery woke me up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. That was my first clue, something was terribly wrong. I scrambled out of bed, threw on a robe, and ran to the window. I got there just in time to see an excavator S-bucket smash through the roof of my grandfather's 100-year-old barn. This wasn't a mistake. This was an execution. My name is Silas Thorne. I'm a 54-year-old retired industrial safety consultant, and I live on 40 acres of prime valley land that has been in my family since the late 1800s. It's a beautiful place, a mix of old-growth timber and rolling pasture. That barn, the one with a giant hole in its roof, was the heart of our farm long before the surrounding hills were paved over for luxury condos. The man behind that excavator was Preston Miller. He is a high-end developer who had spent the last year trying to buy me out to expand his Oak Ridge Estates project. You know the type, Preston S., the kind of guy who thinks a six-figure watch and a politician's handshake make him exempt from the law. He'd offered me pennies on the dollar for my land, and when I told him no, he started a campaign of harassment that would make a mob boss blush. He'd filed noise complaints about my tractor. He called the health department about unauthorized livestock, which are my 2 rescue horses, by the way. He even tried to get my driveway zoned as a public access road. He was relentless, a real piece of work. He assumed he could just wear me down, that I was just some old guy clinging to the past. He was wrong. What Preston didn't know was that while he was planning his illegal demolition, I was finishing up a year-long project of my own. I was working to have that barn certified as a historical landmark. But not just that, I was also turning it into a regional training center for volunteer firefighters. I'd sunk my own money and time into it, retrofitting it with modern equipment while preserving its historic character. And on this specific Saturday morning, I wasn't alone. In fact, I was sitting in the newly renovated office space inside that very barn, drinking coffee with a man named Gregory Vance. Gregory happens to be the State Fire Marshal. 3 of his senior inspectors were with us. We were all there, together, finalizing the paperwork for the barn's new status as a high-tech training facility. When the bucket hit the roof, the entire structure groaned. It was a horrible sound. Dust and splinters rained down on our meeting table, right onto the official documents we were about to sign. Gregory Vance, a man who has stared down literal forest fires without blinking, looked up with a cold, terrifying calm. He looked right at me and said, "Silas, did you authorize a demolition crew this morning?" "No, Greg," I replied, grabbing my phone to dial 911. I think the neighbor just made the biggest mistake of his life. We all walked out of the barn's side door just as the excavator was positioning for a second strike. The operator was revving the engine, ready to tear it all down, and standing nearby, in a neon vest that looked way too clean, was Preston Miller. He was shouting instructions to the operator, like he was the king of the world. He looked up, saw me, and a smug smirk spread across his face. "Morning, Silas," he yelled. "Thought I'd help you clear out some of this junk." The city finally signed the emergency condemnation order. "Preston," I said, and my voice carried clear across the field. "There is no condemnation order, and you might want to tell your guy to power down. This barn is currently an active state-authorized training site." Preston laughed. It was a hollow, arrogant sound. "Nice try, old man. I have the papers right here." He waved a folder that I'm certain contained nothing more than a lunch menu. He was so full of himself, so focused on me, that he didn't even notice the 4 men in official state jackets stepping out from behind me. Gregory Vance walked forward, his badge glinting in the morning sun. His voice was calm, but it had the weight of absolute authority. "Mr. Miller," he said, "I am the State Fire Marshal. You have just utilized heavy machinery to assault an occupied government-sanctioned facility. You are ordered to cease and desist immediately." The color drained from Preston's face so fast I thought he might faint right there in the mud. The excavator operator, realizing he was about 10 seconds away from a prison cell, shut down the engine, literally jumped out of the cab, and started running toward the road. "I don't think I've ever seen a man move so fast." "I had a permit," Preston stammered, his bravado completely evaporating. "The local zoning board said." "The local zoning board," Gregory interrupted, pulling out his radio, "doesn't have jurisdiction over state-certified historical sites or emergency training facilities. Dispatch, I need local PD and the county sheriff at the Thorne property immediately. We have a felony property destruction in progress, with multiple state officials present as witnesses." The next 2 hours were something to behold. Preston's entire world collapsed right in front of him. It turns out, his permit was entirely fraudulent. He had bribed a clerk at the local planning office to lose my historical landmark application and issue a phony demolition permit for a dilapidated shed. His plan was to tear the barn down quickly, pay a small fine later, and then claim it was all just an administrative error once the land was cleared and it was too late to do anything about it. But he made one fatal miscalculation. Because he did it while the State Fire Marshal and his team were physically inside the building, this wasn't just a simple zoning dispute. It was a felony, a whole list of them, Actually, he was facing charges for reckless endangerment, criminal mischief in the first degree, and attempted bribery of a public official. The sheriff arrived and handcuffed Preston right there in the mud of my pasture. As they were leading him away to the cruiser, his face pale and his expensive suit now splattered with dirt, I walked up to him. "Preston," I said, "my grandfather used to say that some people have more money than sense. You've got plenty of money, but you're about to spend a lot of it on lawyers. And while you're doing that, I'm going to use the settlement from your insurance to build the best fire training center in the entire state." He just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The fallout was massive. The investigation into Preston's Oak Ridge estates uncovered a whole web of corruption. It turned out 3 local council members and the head of the zoning board were on his payroll. They had been fast-tracking his permits and conveniently losing opposition filings for years. Preston's company was hit with millions in fines, and his entire project was frozen indefinitely while the state audited every single permit he'd ever been issued. As for me, I received a settlement that didn't just repair the barn, it allowed me to restore the entire 40 acres to its original 19th century glory, complete with a state-of-the-art museum dedicated to local history and agriculture. The barn is now officially the Thorne Memorial Training Center, and every year, we host a charity auction for the families of fallen firefighters. The moral of the story: never assume you can bulldoze someone just because you have a bigger bank account. You never know who's sitting inside the shack you're trying to destroy. And if you're going to commit a crime, maybe undo it in front of the very people whose job it is to enforce the law. If you've ever dealt with a developer or an HOA that thought they were above the law, drop a comment below. I want to hear how you stood your ground. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories about why you should always check who's in the room before you swing the wrecking ball. Next week, I am telling the story of how an HOA tried to fine a retired Navy SEAL for unauthorized landscaping. Let's just say it didn't end well for them. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.